Welcome to the Canadian Multicultural Inventors Museum podcast. Our organization works to promote innovative thinking in young people by highlighting the achievements of innovators from diverse backgrounds. For more information, please visit our website at multiculturalmuseums.org. For our first podcast, we will be discussing Elijah McCoy and his invention that forever changed railway transportation. I'm Alexandra Ratchis, and with me is Krupa Prajapati. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. I know absolutely nothing about trains, so I can't wait to learn something new.
You know, I don't remember the last time I've been on a train. I mean, with the exception of the subway, if that counts. But definitely not a train in the classical sense.
We're talking about a train to Hogwarts?
Exactly that kind. We'll also discuss Elijah's life, before and after his numerous inventions and patents.
More than one?
Yes, but technically, a lot of those were more innovations, adding on to his existing patents to further improve them, as well as improvements on other existing inventions.
So, obviously Elijah didn't invent the train. I'm wondering what makes him a big deal.
You'll find out. So Krupa, imagine it's the year 1871 and you're on a train from Toronto to Montreal.
I imagine the trains then weren't as comfy as they are today.
They were definitely not as quiet as they are today.
But all that noise should be worth it to get there the fastest way possible at the time. Just sit back and relax while it chugs away?
And that's where you're wrong.
Oh.
Back then, it was common practice to lubricate the bearings of trains every 160 kilometers. Montreal is about 550 kilometers away, so imagine the train making its way to Montreal and stopping 3 times so that the cylinders, bearings, and axle box mounting of the train, basically any machinery that moves, is lubricated.
What happens if that isn't done?
Oh, nothing really big, just the normal corrosion and overheating that could result in fire.
That's not good.
To further complicate things, if we didn't lubricate train wheels and other mechanical moving parts, the wheels would get rusted and wouldn't run smoothly across the tracks. Without this process, parts would break down much faster.
Wow. Imagine being halfway to where you're going just to have the wheels break. Sounds expensive.
That's right. So if this isn't done, moving parts on the train, like the wheel and its bearings, had to be replaced every few months. It cost companies lots of money and travelers lots of time. Every time the train stopped to get lubricated, it wasn't just the wheels. As mentioned earlier, the bearings, engines, and other moving parts would also have to be lubricated. So it's a very time-consuming process.
I'm guessing some workers would just walk from one end of the train to the other just to apply lubricant to these parts?
Yep.
Yeah, sounds very time-consuming.
Exactly. If the process of lubrication wasn't done every 100+ kilometers, the train wouldn't move, because there would be friction between moving parts each time the lubricant wore off. This still applies today to most moving parts of machines. It's the same reason why you need an oil change for your car every couple thousand kilometers. Proper lubrication for any machine extends its life, improves efficiency, and increases safety.
Gotcha.
So the train to Montreal's chugging along, and you're almost there.
Great. So I can finally look over my itinerary.
Well, not yet. It stops one more time for another lubrication.
Oh, okay. I think I get why that can be annoying now.
So it took about 4 stops to get to Montreal. Now flash forward a year later. You're back on the train and you realize something. It didn't stop for the entire journey.
Oh.
When you step off the train, you ask one of the attendants why the train didn't stop. You say you have a pretty good understanding of trains, and trains have to be stopped so moving parts can be lubricated.
I didn't know that then, but I do now.
The attendant says,
That's because trains don't need to be manually lubricated anymore.
Okay, so I think this is where Elijah comes in?
That's right. Elijah McCoy had changed the way trains operate forever with the invention of the lubricating cup in 1872.
Lubricating cup?
Essentially, McCoy's invention automatically supplied lubricating oil to cylinders, bearings, and axle box mountings of trains. The whole process of stopping the train every 160 kilometers never had to be done again.
Wow, imagine all the time that was saved.
McCoy's cup was an incredible invention, immediately boosting productivity. Trains were now able to run faster and more profitably, now that they didn't need to be stopped to have their engines and moving parts greased.
So, how's this cup work?
Basically, the lubricating cup dripped oil into moving parts of the steam engine and undercarriage. So while the train was in motion, mechanical parts were continually oiled, cutting out the need for manual oiling. The Michigan Central Railroad adopted this new invention. However, some companies weren't willing to buy into the innovation.
Seems counterproductive not to. Why is that?
That's because Elijah McCoy was of African descent.
Unfortunate. This may essentially be the story of many black inventors at the time.
Let's explore a little of Elijah's early life. Born March 2, 1844, in Colchester, Canada West, that was Ontario at the time, Elijah was the son of freedom seekers George and Millie from Kentucky. His parents fled to Canada in 1837 with the help of the Underground Railroad. His father, George, would later volunteer to defend the province in 1838 when the Mackenzie Rebellion broke out. And for his military service, he was given 50 acres of land as a reward.
Wow, that is a lot of land.
Yep, and from then on, the McCoy family grew to 12 children. However, their stay in Canada didn't last long, as his parents were motivated to move to the U.S. to give their children educational and employment opportunities.
You mentioned the Michigan Central Railroad earlier. Did they end up moving there?
Yeah, but Elijah wasn't always in the U.S. either. So in 1846, the family took a risk to prepare to return to the U.S. The date of their immigration is disputed, though, as the census of Colchester Township, Essex County, from 1851 shows that the family was still on the farm at that time. This would be when Elijah was about 8 years old. So an alternative time for their migration is the 1850s. However, even after settling in Michigan, the family still owned the Canadian Colchester farm for years. Their new home was on a farm of the Starkweather family, where George began growing and harvesting tobacco like he was trained to do in his boyhood by his white father. The Starkweather family was engaged in the Underground Railroad, and George was too. He would fit his family wagon with a false bottom to hide freedom seekers on their way to Canada through Detroit River ports.
Interesting, and also very risky, especially since the family used the same route going to Canada.
As a young child, Elijah displayed mathematical and mechanical aptitude. His parents saved enough money to send him to engineering school that would accept youth of African descent, but it wasn't in the U.S. Around 1860, he went to school at the age of 16 in Edinburgh, Scotland.
Just because he was of his race, he had to literally travel across the ocean to go to school.
And as I mentioned earlier, his invention, though useful in every way, was turned down by a few companies because of his race. In 1865, the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment passed, freeing all slaves. But of course, this didn't make life easier for African Americans. Upon his return, Elijah looked for employment as an engineer. However, due to racist hiring practices, he accepted jobs well below his qualifications.
Of course.
He worked as a fireman in the boiler room of trains. His job included shoveling 2 metric tons of coal into the firebox of the steam engine every hour.
Wow. The evolution of trains is fascinating. They all look essentially the same, but the work to get a train moving now is so different from back then.
Yeah, and the biggest difference is that trains don't need to be stopped at all unlike the time Elijah started his work. Speaking of which, his other duty was also as an oiler.
So he was one of those guys.
That's right. So whenever the train stopped, he would walk along the tracks carrying an oil can to lubricate the moving parts of the heavy iron steam train.
The job ends his invention, of course. It's like the saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
For sure. He patented his first major invention in July 1872. Working in his home workshop, he patented a second cup 1 month later, which improved its function. His lubricating cup revolutionized railroad transportation from the get-go. The device wasn't exactly complicated, so it was easy for competitors to put out similar devices. Many companies copied his design, but his device was much more unique and reliable. Have you heard of the phrase, the Real McCoy?
I have, actually. Did that come from him?
It's highly debated, but many historians do suggest that the phrase became common amongst mechanical engineers who refused to knock off lubricators in their locomotives. Instead, they would demand the original McCoy lubricating cup. But the phrase is also thought to have originated in relation to a number of other figures from the late 19th and early 20th century, including Charlie Kid McCoy and Joseph McCoy. In fact, there was a distiller called G. McKay & Co., which used the slogan, the Real McCay.
We know that other companies copied his design, but Elijah's was more reliable and was the original thing to boot. So I could totally picture engineers demanding the Real McCoy in that context. Now, you mentioned earlier he had other inventions?
Yeah, he moved from Ypsilanti, leaving his work at the Michigan Central Railroad, to Detroit with his second wife in 1882 to focus on inventing. He was also consulted by the Detroit Lubricating Company to design a new steam dome for locomotives in 1885, and he further improved his lubricating device and patented it. You can see the patent for the improved cup if you search online for patent number 270238. Then in 1916, he patented the graphite lubricator. It was a mixture of graphite and oil used to work in superheater locomotives, much larger trains at the time. This mixture offered reduced depreciation of moving parts and promoted more economical use of fuel without clogging the engine. He continued to invent well into his old age. Many of his later inventions were related to machine lubrication.
With all these inventions, did he ever have his own company?
Well, Elijah was never financially able to invest money to manufacture his own products, so he sold his patents to companies that then went on to make millions from his inventions. He would sell shares of his more recent patents to finance his own workshop and manufacturing company. It wasn't until 1920 that he had his own manufacturing company, close to 40 years after his initial lubricating cup invention.
Wow.
His second wife, Mary Delaney, whom he married a year after the passing of his first wife, Elizabeth Stewart, in 1873, was well known as the mother of clubs. With the support of Elijah's income from his inventions, she would found the Phyllis Wheatley Club. It would serve the community through moral and educational uplifting and provide housing for Black women. Elijah also engaged in community activities, co-founding and becoming the vice president of the Businessmen's Council with leading African Americans in Detroit. So even though he had his hands full with community work and with his old age, he never stopped innovating. At age 80...
80 years old? He kept going?
Yeah, he just kept inventing. He patented a tire that he had designed and invented a variety of non-transportation items. This included a folding ironing board designed to serve his wife, and another invention was a modification of the lawn sprinkler. But tragedy struck in 1922 when the McCoys were involved in a car accident. This resulted in the death of Mary, while Elijah suffered critical injuries which he never recovered from. Elijah McCoy's health began to deteriorate, and in 1928 he was committed to an infirmary where he died a year later on October 10, 1929, at the age of 85. In recent years, McCoy's legacy was honored when he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in September 2001. In July 2012, a patent office in Detroit was named after him, called the Elijah J. McCoy Midwest Regional USPTO. That's the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The goal of the Patent Office is to promote innovation, stimulate the economy by connecting entrepreneurs to government resources, supporting students and teachers through STEM education programs, and recruiting diverse talents from the region.
What a great story. Not only did he invent the lubricating cup, but he also kept improving it, realizing that it could be better. Really unfortunate that the norms of the time stopped him from fully benefiting from his own creation.
Yeah, McCoy refused to let discrimination prevent him from applying his knowledge to improve working conditions. His inventions forever changed one of the most economical modes of transportation at the time and benefited other modes of transportation and machinery.
That was great to learn about. I knew nothing about trains, but I do now. I also think he is the real McCoy. It's very fitting. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed it too.
That's all for today's podcast. This episode was written by Rathees Uthayakumar. The music you've been listening to is from the Radio Droids. Sound and editing by Mark Higgingbottom. Thank you for listening to our podcast. CMIM will continue to release new podcasts on Canadian inventors and innovators, so stay tuned.